Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Universal Dialect Show. I'm your host, Chris Cypher73 Cabrera. This is show number 33. We have an excellent guest on. She's a historian and author, and you can find a lot of her work on piercingtheveilofillusion.com. I want to welcome the enigmatic superstar of ancient and hidden history, Michelle Gibson. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Chris.
I'm
Love
sorry.
the introduction. I haven't heard myself addressed that way, so it's like,
yeah, I'm pretty good at doing that.
Cool.
You know, you can take it. Okay, it's all yours if you want to take that.
Sure. Well, I'm kind of used to historical detectives, so
Right.
that seems to fit because I'm not a trained historian, and if I was, I probably wouldn't be open to the information that I've uncovered in my work, and because I didn't have any preconceived slot to put it in. It's just been really open to it, and there's a lot of information that just wants to come back in because it's removed from the historical narrative,
right,
and our collective awareness. And thankfully, the time that we're living in, there's just a lot of people that just seem to be dialed into this information, different pieces of it. So all the people in this community doing this alternative research are bringing in unique pieces of the puzzle that need to come back to awareness. So it may not all fit together perfectly, but I think it's whatever people have a passion for. And so I just happen to have a passion for something that is very hidden, and it's there when you know what to look for. And when you know what to look for, it just kind of flows out of the ether, because it's, you can't kill truth. As much as they've tried, you can't completely suppress it, or we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation.
Right. And you said you're not a trained historian, but if you're doing the work, and the fact that we're the ones that created these titles. We created the fact that in order to label yourself, you have to have a degree. For instance, I went to school to be a graphic artist, but back in the days, you didn't need to go to school for that to have a title. Michelangelo didn't have a degree in art. He was an artist. He just did art. So just the fact that you don't have a title as historian doesn't not make you not a historian. If you're doing the work, to me, you deserve that title. You know what I mean?
And history was one of my favorite subjects in school. I graduated from high school in 1981, so I'll be 60 later this year. And it's been an interesting journey because that early interest in history laid the foundation for me to at least know what we're told happened. So when I do the alternative research, I can kind of put it in perspective with reading between the lines, if you will. And it kind of shows me where to look. And also, if we look at current events, I'm going to be uploading a video later today where I've looked at what happened between 1984 and 1986. And there's a lot of parallels to what's happening today. Right. So this, I'm going to call it an attack on humanity.
Wow.
Has been going for a long time, right. But the same things were happening 40 years ago. Is that right?
Yeah. So listen, when I first, because I've heard of Tartaria before, years ago, maybe when I was living in New York in the 80s, I heard about Tartaria, but I never did research on it. It was just something in the back of my mind. I never really cared about it, but it wasn't until probably before the pandemic, you were on Veritas Radio with Mel Hostrich. And that's when I first heard you speak about it. And then since then, because you, I guess, are the catalyst that kind of started other people looking into it, I'm hearing more and more about it. So I want to apologize in advance because I'm not well versed in this topic. So like you said, it's puzzle pieces. So I might ask you questions maybe out of order, and you can correct me, maybe say, hey, let's not talk about that yet. Let's talk about this first. So I want to apologize in advance. Okay. So let's get into your origin story, Michelle. Who you are, where you're from, and then what got you down this path that you're currently on. And then we'll go from there and see what happens.
Okay, sounds great. So I was born outside of Washington, D.C. in 63, a couple of months before Kennedy was assassinated. And I actually do see that as significant.
Yes.
It's like
Yes.
right before that happened, I was like about 3 months old, and my parents were down in D.C. with the funeral procession going by. And I, lived a middle class life. My parents were teachers. I received a good education in the school system where we lived. And where I lived, about 90% of the high school graduates went to college. And so, that was kind of more the norm than the exception. And when I graduated in 1981, my parents didn't have the money to send me to school. They wanted me to go, but they had gone through a divorce, and I looked for ways to fund it. And I got a scholarship to a junior college, and I was changing my major every week. I'm like, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I would have probably majored in history, but that's like, well, that's not very practical. So I ended up going into the Army in 1982. And I was in the Army from 82 to 86. I was stationed in Germany for 2 years.
Thank you for your service.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your service.
Thank you, ma'am.
Ronald Reagan was president when I was in the Army, and it was a great time to be. Like, the mark dollar rate was, $3 3 marks to $1, and they had like vending machines in the barracks where you could, plop in a mark and get a beer, so basically
Right.
25 cents for a beer. Great days. And I got to travel a lot. And that was kind of what set the direction for my life, because I grew up in suburban Maryland, pretty conventional family. I would not have gotten onto the path that I'm currently on had I stayed. And I think my life would have been much different. I think it probably would have been miserable.
Ooh, yeah.
Because obviously I'm not a conventional thinker. I never have been. And the direction my life took, I was able to unplug from the matrix a long time ago. And so I've never really had certain ways that I had to be or live. And if anything, I've made life choices that have taken me in a different direction from what people expected of me. So I was able to remove those shackles. And my husband was retired Army sergeant. We met in Germany and got married in 89, which was right after I graduated from college. And my degree is a bachelor's in social work and psychology. And I spent about 13 years in nursing home social work, geriatric social work and activities. And my husband died in 2001 from complications from Agent Orange, which we didn't know at the time, but
Wow.
I found out when I moved to Arizona, and I thankfully was able to get a VA pension because I was able to prove that he was in Vietnam, or his medical condition was connected to past service. And so when that was approved in 2018, beginning of 2018, it basically freed up time work because I didn't have to work full time anymore. And it was around the same time that I started to really do my own original research. I had started a couple of years ago, and I wanted to, how am I going to get this out, what I'm finding? And my research started, if I can share my screen real quick.
Yeah, please, go ahead. Please.
Go ahead and set it up because it's disabled.
Is it not allowing me? Here we go. All right, try that. See if it works.
There we go. So basically my original finding and the beginning of my original research, because up to this point I was like gathering information and incubating, and I was hungry to try to find out, what's going on here.
Right.
And I had learned about sacred geometry when I lived in Fairbanks, Alaska, around 2007, 2008, somewhere in there. So I knew what a star tetrahedron was. And a friend of mine had given me a map. That's part of it. That's pretty bedraggled now, but
right.
I found this by connecting major cities in North America. And this is the shape of the Merkaba, which is our light body. It's the shape of the Earth's Merkaba. It's the shape of the universe's Merkaba. It's part of sacred geometry. And this original civilization is laid out along the lines of sacred geometry. And because I had watched and learned from other researchers, watched their work, I knew that the ancients, there were cities that were in alignment around the Earth. I already knew that. So I knew that the ancients were very precise in how this civilization was laid out. And so I extended the lines, I wrote down the places in spreadsheets, and then I went and started looking. I've got about 20 here at each place, and I'm looking at the same kinds of things across countries, and same type of architecture, same type of infrastructure, heavy masonry, same types of rivers, and I believe they're canal systems, rivers and creeks and so forth. And part of a highly sophisticated free energy generating grid system. And that humanity was highly advanced at one time, and that this civilization goes back a long way. And it existed, I believe, up until relatively recently. We're still using the infrastructure that they built. And then all of that got turned on its head and hijacked, and the grid system was inverted and I think turned into a control system, but also a source of wealth and power for what we would call the controllers.
Right.
The people that were behind the beings. I'm going to call them beings because I don't think they're human actually. In an interdimensional war against the creator and creation, and they're doing it through us because they managed to dumb us down and cut us off from our creator and each other, and get us down into our senses, into survival and taste and touch and feel and those kinds of things, and cut us off from our higher capabilities and natures so that they control us and benefit. It's not about benefiting humanity. It's about benefiting these beings that are really quite evil.
Now these lines, are they connected to ley lines by any chance?
I believe so. So this is kind of like a big picture of the sacred geometry grid around the Earth, and then ley lines, individual ley lines are all throughout this. And ley lines used to be on maps. The older maps typically have these ley lines across land and water. And then over time, a particular time period, particularly with Mercator, Gerardus Mercator, these ley lines started to be removed, where they would just show on water instead of land, and then they were removed entirely, and all you have are the latitude and longitude lines. But this is all part of a deliberate replacement of this new system that they brought in to confuse us, to so we wouldn't know where we were, who we were, where we were, what shape that the Earth was. They've done so much to alter our perception of space and time by these overlays, let's call them.
Right. And then what I've noticed too, Michelle, is that some of these lines go out towards sea, like the points.
Mm-hmm.
What would be there? Maybe was there land at one point?
I do. At this point, I do. And at this point, I very strongly believe from the research that I've done that the sinking of Atlantis took place relatively recently, and that a lot of these coastal areas, the land just sank off. All up through here, you have estuaries.
Yes.
Old records, and actually all over, the estuaries are all over the place, not just in the United States. But California was said to have been an island, and just the whole idea that, we've always heard, well, California was going to break off and fall into the ocean with an earthquake. Well, it sure looks like it already happened. And,
Right.
and I have done research that's on my website and on my YouTube channel to back that up. But I think the worldwide civilization, which is best known as Tartaria, was Atlantean, and before that it was Lemuria. It was like one continuous civilization, and I think jealous beings wanted to crash the party, figured out a way to do it, and deliberately created a cataclysm that caused that to happen. And there's disagreement in the community on what caused it.
Right.
Some believe it's natural, some believe resets take place over couple hundred year periods. Personally, I believe that it was a long civilization and one massive reset. And when I say massive, I mean they got into everything. They got into our perception of time and space and place, into language, into religion. I think the mud flood, they created a liquefaction event that's called a mud flood, and that when they tell us they were building railroads or subways or whatnot, they were actually digging them out, or having us dig them out,
Right.
getting them restarted, and restarted enough to bring civilization back online and create the new world that they wanted to create. And we're seeing that play out now.
So was Tartaria pretty much the whole world?
So this civilization
Like
was worldwide.
Right.
Tartaria was actually Asia.
Okay.
And there were different empires on different places. Now, with what I just said, I'm kind of moving into a place where I'm thinking there was a lot more land mass, and things may have been organized differently, if you will. But in the information that's available, you hear about the Mughal Empire and the Phoenicians, and there's a lot of different empires. Barbaria was North Africa, Tartaria was Asia. There's just a lot of them, and we're taught that it was warfare and they're fighting each other, and I'm not seeing that. What I'm seeing is just this beautifully integrated civilization that had the same characteristics all over the earth. And so I think it was harmonious and balanced. I think they were the original tribes of Israel. I mean, all of them, all the peoples of the earth. And when I say it goes back to Lemuria, there's been so much disinformation and division on about race. But everything that I've come to believe is that Lemuria, or Mu, is where we get the word Moor from.
The Moors, correct.
And there are, Muor, and Florida's got plenty of Moorish architecture.
Yeah. Yep.
A lot of the architecture has been destroyed, and architecture that we would think would be Greek or Roman was also part of this ancient civilization. So there's different styles within it, but they were master builders, master masons, master astronomers, master hydrologists, and they built all of this amazing infrastructure that was attributed to others when they were recrafting the historical narrative, if you will, rewriting it or revising it.
And these are these beings that you talk about?
When I say beings, I think we're talking, I think fallen angels are real.
Okay.
So I think they're in the mix.
Like Nephilim?
They're more than likely in the mix. Other negative, let's call them extraterrestrials. There's controversy about that too. But these and archons.
Yep. Parasites.
Also known as parasites. So you can call them in the general category of parasites. You can call them demons, lower vibrational beings that are just into it for the energy vampirism. They're not creative, but they're intelligent in the sense that they can reverse engineer things. So the technologies that humans create in the past and in the present have been utilized by these parasites. And that's what they want indefinitely, because they don't have that spark of God in them. They want it, but
Right.
they're not, that's not who they are. So they're trying to set up a system so they can parasite on us indefinitely. And that's where transhumanism comes in, and the technologies that have been put forward as beneficial with regards to, cell phones and, all this other stuff that they're trying to get us plugged into, becoming cyborgs,
Right.
essentially.
So when it comes to Tartaria, Michelle, so you've found out about it, let's say in the last like 10 years or so, 15 years. But what do you, when in your research, have you found out when it was first mentioned, Tartaria, like where it was first written or who mentioned it first?
Well, on old maps and so forth, you do see the word Tartaria. Again, it's over in Asia, Russia, China, Tibet, Korea, Japan. And it's best known as that because that's where I think the research first started to come from. And so that's how it kind of got into our conscious awareness at this point. But you see, so the Moors were the holders of ancient Egyptian mysteries or Kemetic mysteries. And so the narrative we've been given is like everything's been split apart, whereas it was really all together. It was all. So you've got sphinxes in St. Petersburg. You can look up sphinxes in St. Petersburg in Russia, and they're there. That's an Egyptian symbol.
Right.
And you've got sphinxes on top of buildings in the United States. And again, they say, well, this was built much, much later. This is like within the last 100 years or 200 years or whatever. Or they got these gigantic Egyptian monuments, including obelisks that weigh tons, over to a different place from Egypt and set them up. And there's some ridiculous stories about how that was supposed to have happened. And so, they're trying to say, well, this came from Egypt, or this was done in an Egyptian revival style within the last 100 years.
That's a psyop.
That's what they tell us.
Right.
And what's interesting is when you really start digging down to it, and I encourage everybody, just start looking, start questioning in your own community what they tell you about the architecture and, how things were supposed to have gotten there. And also look for a history of electric streetcars in your community, because streetcar systems used to be everywhere. Interurban systems used to be everywhere, where you could just, hop on a streetcar and go from the big city to the country. And those all got removed for the most part. You might have a few miles of track in some places where it used to be miles and miles and miles of track. So it got taken out as soon as, so they got the rail lines restarted after this mud flood. And then
when was the mud flood? I'm sorry, Michelle. I just want to get context.
So what I've come to really focus my research on, and it's been very productive, is a time loop between 1492, which was the year of the fall of the Moors in Spain, the fall of Granada, and the beginning of Isabel and Ferdinand, and this whole new narrative. And I found a lot of significant indicators in 1492, and that includes Columbus heading over this way to the New World, authority from Pope Alexander VI to grab the land with the Inter Cetera papal bull, and the game was afoot. And it was kind of how they laid the foundation for enslaving, not only in legitimizing the murder of the original peoples, but also there's a whole lot more to that. So they took the land and it set up a legal precedent so that when it went to court, like the Supreme Court, they said, well, because of the law of discovery and these papal bulls, this is legitimate. They can take this land. And so they set up the foundation for their new system, and how they actually went about legitimizing their ownership of this land that wasn't theirs, and the power to go along with it, and the the government, the beginning of corporations, and so on and so forth. And then 1942 was midway through World War II. And when I first started looking into it, it was the year that the Philadelphia experiment took place. And I'm personally of the belief that there's a connection between the Philadelphia experiment and something about what's taken place here.
Can you get into that? What is, for those who don't know what the Philadelphia experiment is? Can you get into that a little bit?
According to the first research I did on July 22nd of 1942, the USS Eldridge, which was in the Philadelphia Navy Yard, went invisible. So there was this, green fog that built up around it, and then it disappeared. And then it came back in about 15 minutes. And the crew was disoriented. Some of them were in the bulkhead, fused to it. And when I first learned of it, it was like, yeah, this really happened. But then as time goes on, it's like, oh no, that's a hoax, and nobody can prove it.
Right.
But for a variety of reasons and some other researchers that I was looking into, I really think that it had something to do with this in some way. Now, whether it caused the mud flood, I'm landing on the side that it went back to a certain point in time and caused a rip in the fabric of space-time that allowed Rothschild, Weishaupt, Rockefeller,
Warburg,
parasites to come in and
take over.
Incarnate in human form. Because around the same time, I'm figuring out this time loop idea. There's 450 years between 1492 and 1942, and they love numerology, but in an occulted form. 1717 is the midpoint year. And when I started researching what happened in 1717, a lot of anomalous stuff came up. And then I found a lot of really interesting things between 1492 and 1942. And I have exhaustive research to show what I found on my blog and in my YouTube videos. And my YouTube videos are made from my blog posts. So it's basically the same information. It's just however you prefer to imbibe it.
What's crazy, Michelle, is like when you say certain things, and then my brain's like, boom, where have I heard this before? Where have I seen this before? So you talk about this ripple in time, right? Where the ship disappears, it reappears, people are disoriented, and then they also are fused with like the ship. There's 2 episodes of the X-Files that kind of like talk about this. One is a ship that turns people older, right? And there's another one where you have this sort of triangle UFO. This is in the X-Files, 2 different episodes, 2 different seasons, where this UFO throws out like this sort of like a plasma field, and you either switch places with a person that you're with. So it's almost like that one movie where the 2 people switch places. I forgot what it's called, where the mother switches places with the daughter, right? But in that same episode, there's soldiers that fuse in with the rocks. So when you said that, it's like I've heard that before, and I'm wondering, like, individuals like Carter, who was the producer of X-Files, like, who was he talking to? Because I mean, it's uncanny. And then you said something along the lines like the Rothschilds, something coming in them and taking over their body. That reminds me of like Stargate, the movie, where the alien was trying to find a human to host as a host. So I'm wondering where they got that from,
There's also a movie called The Final Countdown, which is about a time-traveling naval vessel.
Final Countdown.
Now, I didn't know that when I came up with this, this kind of concept, but it showed up on my feed, and it's like a naval destroyer that went back in time to 1941.
Is it a recent movie?
No, from the 80s.
From the 80s,
and so I think, so about this, again, it was all this information that came together at the same time. a friend of mine who seemed to be very connected to, let's just say, spirit. I live in Sedona, Arizona, where there's a lot of this kind of thing, but I've gotten some interesting information that way. And she came by to see my roommate, who was a reader at the time, and stopped in to say hi to me. And I opened the door, she gave me a hug, and she just said, "Oh, I see your guides over there. They want me to tell you something." And the first thing she said was, "They want me to tell you you're correct," which was the idea of the time loop between 1492 and 1942. But then she said they're showing me something. And she said they're showing me Ireland in 1742. And on one side, it's all white and frozen, and on the other side, it's bright and sunny.
Right.
And so I looked up Ireland in 1742, and one of the things that came up was Handel's Messiah premiered in Dublin, Ireland in 1742. And then the other thing that came up was the Great Frost of Ireland, which took place between 1740 and 1741.
Right.
No known cause. 500,000 people died from this extreme cold weather event in Ireland. And then this, performance of Messiah happens like right after the Great Frost. That was in 1740, 1741. Mayor Amschel Rothschild was born in 1744. Adam Weishaupt, the founder of the Bavarian Order of the Illuminati, was born in 1748. And Duke Francis of Saxe-Coburg and Saalfeld was born in 1750. And that obscure ducal line is our royal family today. And they replaced the original rulers of the world, in particular Europe, but it was seated by this one guy that came in 1750, who was like Queen Victoria's and Prince Albert's grandfather. And Duke Francis's kids seated like Belgium, Portugal, other places. And I don't know if you've heard of King Leopold II.
Yep.
That was his grandfather.
Wow.
And King Leopold II, son of King Leopold I, King of the Belgians, Otto von Bismarck, the Chancellor of Germany during the German Empire, basically carved up Africa between European countries. And that was in 1884 at the Berlin Conference. Just carved it all up. Here, you get this, you get this. And King Leopold II got the Belgian Congo as his private colony, and very known for brutality. So they got the resources, and they cut the hands off of the people that live there and things like that. And that's findable. I mean, you can look for that. It's there.
That's crazy.
So, and when I these are malevolent beings, that's what I'm talking about. I mean, they're killing us. They're not helping us.
Right. They're not our friends.
Right. And that's just continued on to this day. I mean, the people in power, the system that was put in place to keep them in power. So, hey, it's great. We're bringing in democracy and liberty and freedom and this, that, and the other thing. They were actually bringing in a system they could control.
Right.
And they took out, the people with the ancient bloodlines. Going back to King Solomon.
Yeah, the biggest psyop is making the people believe that they're free when they're not.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because America's supposed to be the land of the free, but we're not really free. I mean, I put up you're my 33rd video. I've been pretty much talking about the same thing with almost all my guests, and my 31st video got taken off of YouTube. They said it was because of medical misinformation, when we don't even talk about medical stuff. I mean, I talk about conspiracy theories in it and stuff like that. And then I disputed it, and literally 10 minutes later, they denied the dispute. So, I mean, it's like they don't even, where's the freedom? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, where is it?
Right. And that's how they get consent, is they lie to us about everything. And then we're living in 1984 right now in the
100%.
book. And he said, I'm going to put up a video later today looking at what happened in history between 1984 and 1986. And it's very telling. I mean, I think the only difference is we don't have the amount of terrorist actions that we did starting in the 80s. You don't have the plane crashes and the, planes being blown up out of the sky and all those other things. We have other things. We have the, the shooters, the lone gunmen firing on crowds, but that's the same.
Right.
And the chemical releases are the same. But
what are your thoughts on that? Like, how come people haven't caught on? You have
I don't
one
know.
chemical thing, and then it's like 2 or 3 more happen like right after that, and people are like, "What are the Kardashians doing right now?"
Yeah. And that's it. I mean, this has been a massive psychological warfare going on for a very long time, and people have kind of gotten desensitized. Critical thinking has not been emphasized in our school systems since about 1850, 1851. And that kind of gets back to your earlier question of when did this happen? So I gave the example on my timeline because I think prior to a certain point, our history is just backfill. And beyond a certain point, it's them giving us history with them in it. And it could have been a series of events that took place within a set period of time. I'm open to that. I just think there was a very long and sophisticated and beautiful civilization prior to that. And that they just destroyed it and repopulated the earth. You hear a lot about orphan trains and infantoriums these days. They grew human babies. And I'm a person with a lineage in my family, genealogy and so forth. And one of the biggest questions I've gotten is, well, I can trace my ancestors back to Charlemagne or something like that.
Right.
And other people say, well, there's orphans in my family. My husband was one. His great grandfather was an orphan after the Civil War and got out west on a cattle drive and ended up in Oklahoma, and that's where his family's from. And what I think happened was I came across some other things in my research that showed King Henry VIII, I think, is like a figurehead. There's a lot of things happening during his reign beyond his 6 wives and forming the Church of England, that the dissolution of the monasteries took place between 1536 and 1541, where they just tore apart and destroyed the monasteries, took their money. These places used to be where the genealogies were kept. And then it was replaced by the College of Arms, and they just kind of redid everything, all of the nobility and so forth. And so they brought in a new nobility to replace the ancient nobility. And so you start to see first baron of blank in the historical record around the 1500s, 1600s. So during this period of time, and then just went in and they, this is it.
They fudged
coats
it,
of
yeah.
arms, coats of arms, and all this other stuff. And so they started to take control over that whole process and giving us, these families that became the lords of the manor and so on and so forth. I mean, I'm pretty convinced at this point we're still in a feudal system.
Yeah.
Because when the new British nobility started to come over and colonize New England, for example, they were using titles like Lord of the Manor, a bit 1600s, 1500s, 1600s. That's not a term that we associate with America. And they still hold the land that they were granted 300 years ago.
Wow.
Like Gardner's Island and the eastern end of Long Island and Fisher's Island was another one off the coast of Connecticut. It's kind of all right in that area where the son of John Winthrop, who was the Massachusetts Bay Colony governor, his son was granted the title of Lord of the Manor of this island. And, when I talk about the Philadelphia experiment, there's some really interesting things going on it's off the Atlantic coast between New Jersey and the Atlantic. You have the New York, New Jersey Bight area, and you have Long Island and Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard and all these places. And Martha's Vineyard's the most expensive place to live in the United States. It's like number one. It's like they coveted this land, but if you look at it, all these little islands, they look half sunk. So that kind of goes back to my idea of this event that just sunk these land masses. But there's something very special about that area because that's where they all want to be.
Right.
Long Island, that whole area is prime real estate. New Jersey. So there's something going on with the grid system, I think, power-wise. New York Harbor, New York Bays, upper and lower, it's just historically there's a lot going on. There's lighthouses, there's star forts, there's historical trolley parks, amusement parks. It looked like this just massive corridor of power. So there's something about that area that the controllers coveted because they went right there, the Rockefellers and all of them,
Yeah,
the land developers, Astors and
yeah, I lived in New York. Astor's, I think Astoria, Queens is named after them. And then you have Astor Hotel, if I'm not mistaken. But I lived in New York from 73 till 89. But I would notice just like, okay, so this is in the 80s. The Bronx was like, they say the Bronx was burning, and that's because it was a mess. It was like a third world country. But even inside some of these apartment like complexes or these apartment houses, you can see the architecture was just didn't belong. It didn't fit. Then you have places like Penn Station, right? That doesn't look like it belongs there. It looks like somebody moved in and just changed some things, but the foundation of it doesn't look like it belongs. Can you get into like the architecture, not just in New York, but just around the world of these different, structures that are look out of place?
Every single one of those buildings is said to have been built within the last couple hundred years, into the 1800s, early 1900s. They have records, they have blueprints, they have all these things saying, we built this. They didn't build it. So you get the word, people say that founded Freemasonry.
Yes, that's what I was going to talk about. I was going to talk about the Masons because this is something that I didn't understand. Masons are supposed to be master builders. I have not seen one Mason build anything. I don't see Masons carrying tool belts. You pass by lodges. There's no construction vehicles or anything there. But I heard that Masons, they're this society that got created, and all they did was brand the buildings that were already existed. Is that true?
That's what they did. I believe that, absolutely, because I think the original Masons were Moorish Masons. And they're the ones that built everything. And you've got within Western Freemasonry, you have the allegory of Hiram Abiff. And Hiram Abiff was the builder of Solomon's Temple, and 3 lowly craftsmen wanted his secrets. He said no. So they killed him. And when they killed him, the keys were lost. And what is called Freemasonry now is speculative Freemasonry. But what they're actually doing is these beings that I'm talking about infiltrated Masonry, took their legacy. They, as far as we know, they only have 33 degrees, and the original Masonry has 360 degrees, the degrees in a circle.
Right.
And that original knowledge has been lost. But these Masons are doing something occult and ritualistic with Masonry. as part of that control system of us, and also the miseducation and misdirection of who actually built everything.
So
And
they freely, so they freely took the masonry of others, and then that's why it's called Freemason, because they just took it for free.
Apparently, that it fits, and you have different. You've got the Scottish Rite, you have the York Rite within Western Freemasonry, but then you have these historical figures that are all connected together that were Masons. And Lenin was a Mason, Marx was a Mason, Albert Pike was a Mason. Lots of so-called generals during the Civil War were Masons. And I question whether it happened the way we're told, big time. Something happened, but I don't think it was what we're told. I think they were, as part of the cover-up of what they did with the original civilization. So let's say the Masonries got the buildings habitable, made the streets drivable. And so in more places than not, you see streets look like this with the building on top with big window or door down here, and then they get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller.
That's up north a lot, and on the West Coast a lot because of the elevation, I would imagine, right? Whereas here in Florida, it's primarily flat, but
just look around because it's there too.
Really, in Florida?
I spent time. My mom's family's from Florida, and I was in Tampa a couple of years ago looking at the Sulphur Springs water tower there. And when I was driving around Busch Gardens and up and down Bush Boulevard and throughout that area, I noticed Temple Terrace. I noticed mud flood stuff. So
wow, it's crazy.
You wouldn't think it, but
but
it's there. The same kind of thing.
Elevation
where
thing?
it's just not it's not level. It's like
so let me ask you a question
underneath.
Concerning other ancient sites and its connections possibly to Tartaria, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, Pumapunku in Bolivia, Angkor Wat in Asia, are those all connected?
100%.
And they look like they're, well, not Angkor Wat, but more like Pumapunku and Göbekli Tepe look like they were destroyed. Like not fell down because of weather, but like destroyed.
Right. And again, you hear, something happened thousands of years ago. I think we're talking about something that happened a lot more recently. Graham Hancock talks about Angkor Wat being a mirror of the constellation Draco. Angkor Wat also has solstice alignments with the main temple, I think Angkor Thom. It's built on a square. It's just like it's all perfectly in alignment with the heavens, and that's what this civilization was doing. They were lining everything up. Everything was in alignment on Earth that was in heaven. So even structures like the Statue of Liberty, which was originally a lighthouse, also, and I think lighthouses were much more than what we're told. You see the sun, a solar alignment over the torch at certain times. It might be related to solstices. Off the top of my head, I can't think of it. But I know you can Google the sun over the torch of the Statue of Liberty and find it. And other places, Capitol buildings and temples and mosques and all over, there's these alignments of the moon and the sun, and sometimes it's like every full moon. But they were lining everything up, and I think it was all part of this integrated energy system. And I think lighthouses were like distribution of this light that was being generated. And New York has a lot of lighthouses there.
Yes.
Going up. And historically, there's maybe a handful that are still standing on the Hudson River. There's a lot more. So it's like they wanted to get control of these lighthouses, and some of them they destroyed, and some are still there, and they all have these stories. This was built late 1700s or during the 1800s for commerce, but there's a lot more to the story. And off the top of my head, I can't think of the name of the lighthouse, but it's in direct alignment with the Statue of Liberty.
The Hudson Is it the Hudson Lighthouse or
It's
near
not the Hudson. It's I want to say it's a Rikers. Anyway, if you look at a pic,
near Rikers Island? You talking about?
um, I've done a blog post about or video.
Yeah, yeah.
If you want to take a look at it at some point. I've done so many.
I know you probably got a lot. I'm sorry. I apologize. That's the thing with this topic. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's just fascinating to look at the history of the Hudson River and, going down through Manhattan and into the New York Bay and on out to the Atlantic Ocean. All the stuff that's there is just absolutely mind blowing. And a lot of it's just gone. Star forts all through there.
What is a star fort? Do you mind going into what like a star fort is specifically?
Sure.
I mean, is it a building like what you would consider a fort? Like
okay, so I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to go to that post and show you the one I have in mind.
Oh, that's your website.
That's my website.
Everybody, this is piercingtheveilofillusion.com. So check it out, please.
Okay, so I called it Star Forts Gone by Trolley Parks and Lighthouses of New York's Hudson River Valley and New York Bays.
All right.
And
my sister lives upstate, and I believe we drove by.
Anyway, these things are in alignment with each other is the point that I'm trying to make.
Yeah, because I could see you like right there. You can see it's lined up with it. That picture.
Yes. It's just these aren't random happenings here. I'm trying to think of the best way to present this. So let's look at the Verrazano Narrows Bridge between Staten Island and Brooklyn. And on the Staten Island side, you have Fort Wadsworth. And that's a picture of Fort Wadsworth. It was said to have been established before the War of 1812 and as well between 1845 and 1861. And that's typical of the dates that they give us for the building of these. And a lot of times there's lighthouses associated with these star forts also. Most of the forts are part of the Gateway National Recreation Area. Big, huge, heavy masonry. How are we building things around the time of the Civil War and before without the tools and, with the low technology that we're told existed at that time? And there's countless stories. Say, we built this then, but oh, by the way, we didn't have all this other stuff.
Yeah. It's like the pyramids.
Right. And then on the other side, there's Fort Hamilton. And this is the neighborhood around Fort Hamilton. So you've got the brick and you've got the archways around the windows, stone.
That's
we
New
don't
York.
Build like that today.
Yeah, that's New York. That's almost all over New York.
Most of the places I've seen.
Yeah.
It's like build it as quickly as they can out of wood.
Yeah.
Particle board and plywood.
Right, in and out.
We don't do this anymore. But they tear them down saying, well, we just determined it was structurally unsound. And that's the reason that's given for the destruction of a lot of these places. But it's BS. And then you have these historic parks on Coney Island. There were 3 of them. And, you see this beautiful classical looking architecture at these places.
Yeah.
So it's just so a star fort is they're usually in pairs or clusters, and I think a definition of battery is they're arranged in pairs to give a push through a circuit. I think that's what we're looking at, that there was some form. And when I was looking, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing because my pictures aren't loading. But they were like the first places that the colonizers went to when they went to take over a place, if you start looking at the historical narrative of what happened when. And they're along waters, river systems, coasts, but they're also inland as well. And a lot of structures inland that are called water towers look like these lighthouses.
Right.
And they have crazy stories associated with them. And there's a lot of us that believe that these water towers actually functioned as like Zeppelin or airship docking stations. Because some of them have a history of having an elevator in them, like the one in Sulphur Springs in Tampa.
Right.
Was said to have an elevator on the inside. But that's not the, but the story is that they were to pump water to the residents of the area and all that other stuff. But there was clearly a lot more going on. And the one in Sulphur Springs in Tampa is just huge and neglected. When I went there, I was the only car in the parking lot. And I walk up to this massive structure and take pictures, and there's just no way to express the size of it in the pictures. And when I was first really starting to wake up to this, I was taking my mom to an assisted living facility north of Tampa, and I passed by this, and I did a rubberneck, and I looked at it, and I'm like, what's that? Off of 285.
Right.
And so I went, I did a in-depth look at it because I was really curious. And it's really,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, for anybody that's interested in this, doing field research is very productive. If you just go out and start looking, an internet search is great if that's all that you have, but you get details that you don't get in person. And that's kind of how my journey started. Was I started to wake up to things, and then I started looking at places with a different mindset.
And so when you go to these places, let me ask you a question. When you go to these places, is there a certain energy that you feel?
Sometimes.
Do you think you get like messages or anything, something like that?
My gifts are more intuitive. And I think being able to look outside of the box and not just go with what the narrative tells me about something, and seeing that there's more skill and much more to the story than what we're told. And I am sensitive to energy. In some places, they've deliberately, put a park on it and brought in lots of people and lots of ATVs and motorbikes, and done all kinds of things to bring that vibration down. But there have been places that I've been to where I kind of felt a hum in my legs or my hands.
Right. Wow.
And parks. You look at parks differently because they tend to preserve infrastructure that's been destroyed in other places. I mean, if they want to dig up a plot of ground for a new residential neighborhood, that stuff's toast, or a road. But you can still find it in certain places. And a lot of buildings, they're still using them. Libraries and museums and schools, banks.
Were they built for giants
prisons
initially?
I think we were much bigger. I think they were built by much larger people. And you can start seeing that if you look at the scale of these buildings and when they were said to have been built. So like if you look at the Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C., it was said to have been built between 1932 and 1935, which would have fallen right in between the Great Depression and the beginning of World War II in 1939. And it's huge. And a classical looking structure. So that's just one example.
Right. So do you mind if we get a little bit more into, because we kind of glossed over it, but it's part of like everything that you've studied, because one thing bleeds into another. So it's kind of hard to just like focus on one thing because there's so many other things from past and present kind of bleed in together. But wanted to talk about the orphan train, because I first heard about it through you and I looked it up. And to me, it's the first I don't want to say the word, but trafficking.
Child trafficking.
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead and say
mean,
it.
it's
It's
man.
true.
Can you get into that, please? Like, when did that start? Who was running that, and why were there so many orphans at that time?
Okay. So just a little bit ago, I talked about repopulating the earth. Some kind of cataclysm happened, and they're growing kids. Okay, that's one part of it, but I think there were adults. So when I've looked at the historical record, 1810, 1830, 1850, 1870, 1890, in particular in the 19th century, were initiatory years. Something happened beginning in that 10, 30, 50, 70, and 90. So, like if you look at the New Madrid earthquake, was said to have happened in 1812. And there were other things that happened, but that's kind of the early was starting around that. It was earlier than, but a lot starting to happen starting in 1810. In 1830, you have a lot of things coming in, like hard liquor, distilleries, and so forth. To me, 1850 is like the official kickoff of the New World Order timeline. So they got their game together. They had the 1851 Crystal Palace exhibition, which has a crazy backstory, and they kind of had this massive infrastructure and all these wonderful things. Queen Victoria opened it. I want to say it was May to October or something like that of 1851. We did this, we did this, we did this, we did this. All these important people came. And then, so a lot of things were going on around 1850. And I just give the Crystal Palace exposition as an example of, okay, this is our kickoff. We're here. We've arrived. We're going to show off all this wonderful technology, and then we're going to destroy it. Which was the case with, from that point on, for about 100 years of the World's Fairs and Expositions. We built this to be temporary, and then we destroyed it, and there might be a few buildings left, but hey, that's the way it goes. And if you look up the definition of exposition, it's like setting the storyline. So it's like they're bringing in all these things to show people and tell people this is the way that it was, whether it's what was supposed to have happened in history to new products, all these wonderful things. To me, it's like they were showcasing the original civilization, took what they could from it, and then destroyed the rest of it. And the orphan train movement started around 1854. So they've got tons of kids on this side of the Atlantic and in Europe as well. You've got Charles Dickens novels coming out, Oliver Twist. You've got Les Miserables with Victor Hugo in Paris. All around the same time, there's these like orphans, these destitute, poor kids. You've got these workhouses. You've got insane asylums. You've got all of this human warehousing going on. And then you're getting them drunk with hard liquor, beer, that kind of thing. And then there's juvenile asylums. So you've got that, and you've got the orphan trains. So it's like, what are we going to do with these dirty, nasty, ugly humans? We've got to do something. And Charles Loring Brace, I think his organization was the Children's AIDS Foundation, something like that. He was a friend of Frederick Law Olmsted's, and I see Olmsted as a major figure in this cover-up as well, famous landscape architect. And Brace, along with the assistance of an Astor, I want to say it's the wife of John Jacob Astor IV, set up this program of shipping children from some of these asylums and from other places out to points everywhere in North America. They just put them on the train. They'd stop in these towns. They might end up at the theater or something and parade these kids around. And it was supposed to be to help the kids and help the families, but I see it as a repopulation effort. And there's no follow-up, nothing in place to see what happens. So if a kid did find a good home, I would have said that was the exception. And given what we know now about human trafficking that we didn't know even 10 years ago, it sure looks like it was the beginnings of it on an industrial scale. And then the infantoriums were sideshows with neonatal babies in incubators. So people would pay to go in and see these babies in incubators. And what's really interesting is that particular manifestation ended with a fire at Coney Island. And again, I want to say it was around 1944, somewhere in there. And it was around the same time that Planned Parenthood, the original organization that became Planned Parenthood, got started. And so, again, it sure looks like there's something nefarious going on with the farming out of children, and also the search for infants and things like that.
Yeah, Bill Gates is connected to Planned Parenthood, right? Through his wife, I believe. If I'm not mistaken.
So I'm not familiar with that, but it you just have to really step back and say there's something really bad going on here. And even though it's hard to believe it, and even though it's been disparaged, and you're a conspiracy theorist and you're terrible for saying that or whatever, they don't want to be caught.
Right.
And again, that's why I go back to, I don't believe these are humans. And and they've messed up a lot of people. Certainly, they're trying to turn us into them. But most people are good, I believe.
Right.
And just can't believe that. And I've been down the rabbit hole enough that I don't dispute that at all, but I don't focus my research on the darker aspects of what's been going on. But I know about it, and then I can, cross connect back to the research that I do.
Right.
But it's not my primary focus unless it happens to come up when I'm doing some other research. But you can start connecting the dots with all these little pieces that are there to find if you look for them.
Right. And that's what anything really, like anything that paranormal or whatever, like all these dots, eventually they all connect, because we're you can find similarities in things and just make those connections. But one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is you said that we've been under attack for the longest time, right? They haven't won yet. Why? Why is it? What are we doing? Even with all the distractions and the fact that not many of us are trying to find the true knowledge, why haven't they won yet? What is it about us that they haven't just won yet?
Number one, they have to have our consent. They really can't lay a finger on us. So their only hope for success is convincing enough of us of their lies to maintain control the way that they have. And they were able to do that until the internet came around. And then as time has gone on, even though they meant that to be a control mechanism, it's actually been how we've been able to wake up and wake each other up and have those instant communications. So even though the nighttime news might show the controlled images, you've got plenty of contrary images to show what's really going on. And then they just double down on the lies, the script, the talking points.
Right.
And as hard as the last couple of years have been, I thought things would happen differently. I did not imagine we'd get this far into it. But what it's done is it's exposed the controllers in a way that would not have happened otherwise, because you just can't tell people what's going on. They have to experience it.
Right.
And I'm hoping that, if you talk about the toxic chemical releases and so forth, if what I think is going to happen, they will be held accountable, they will be brought to justice, and that there are healing technologies that we've been denied access to. as how horribly we've been treated. And that's my hope with what's going on now. But, you know, we're not alone, and God is real. God wins, and our true nature is compassion and love. You know, we have to be horribly abused to, you know, fight each other the way we have and to kill each other the way we have. And one of the things I have to share about my story that kind of makes it interesting is I've been awake to a lot of things, fully awake since about 2012. And then between 2012 and 2016, I learned how dark the dark was. I learned about a lot of this stuff we just talked about. I'm like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
What's going to happen? I mean, 2016 scared the crap out of me.
Yeah.
And all this work that I'm doing really came together around 2016, 2017. And I met people and things just kind of worked together synchronistically to bring me further down this path. And it wouldn't have happened earlier. It just wouldn't have. So it feels like the timing is right. And now I'm seeing the tide turning with people waking up and with things coming to the surface that were suppressed before. So like Twitter now is not under the control of the ones that want to keep that want to keep the truth hidden, and things are starting to come out that were being suppressed before, and you know, just all within the same time period. So I think 2023 is going to be a really interesting year. Hopefully, the year that things change completely, and that they start making mass arrests and all the other things I've been waiting for a while.
A few more things before I let you go, Michelle. You had also talked about golf courses. What are the significance of golf courses? Because I mean, I live in Florida. There's a lot of golf courses. I mean, I look at them and they just look like regular landmass, but there's something significant to them.
Right. Look on them as earthworks, a place called Zephyr Hills. These shapes of the landscape, they're like geometric and perfectly formed and all that other stuff. I think golf courses were like a name for them. An old name for them is the word links, Links, links. And I kind of think maybe they were some form of circuitry on the grid system, like linkages between circuits and things like that.
Right.
They're seen as burial mounds and stuff like that. And I tend to think they're more like energy conductors or holders of some kind. There may be something like that associated with them, but I'm not really opinion. Tend to have, with these earthworks, and not just golf courses, but any earthwork, they were built a certain way with certain materials where they have certain electric qualities and things like that. So I think it has more to do with energy function than anything else. But to make a golf course, all you have to do is like scrape off the top and you've got a sand trap or whatever they're called.
Right. Do you think this pyramid's buried under some of those golf courses?
I don't know about that, but when you start going around your own area where you live, especially where you live, just start noticing shapes in the landscape, because you might see a gas station on top of an earthwork, and the earthwork looks more like an angle with grass on it, and it's smooth and it's just shaped perfectly. And other places, landfills are a good example, and you know, it's just everywhere, but you don't see it until you tune into it. I mean, not too long ago when I was in Florida, I'm driving south on 75, and I noticed a pyramid I think it's where Pasco County and Hernando County meet. So they're there,
Right.
but we don't see them because they're not supposed to be there.
Right.
So
Yeah.
earthworks, and when I say earthworks, I'm just talking about land that looks like it's like just
Like something
perfectly
was done.
formed.
Yeah, like something
Yeah,
was done.
you know, perfectly formed.
All right. So we talked about giants, these beings that are on there. So I wanted to ask you one more thing, your thoughts on like things like cryptozoology, because we talk about giants and Sasquatch is considered a giant. What are your thoughts on that?
Yep.
You believe in them?
Yep.
Have you seen anything?
No. Not myself.
Okay.
They're very high level beings. They're in indigenous legends. They're in a level of consciousness that they want us to be in, or that we used to be in, you know, where they can communicate telepathically, and, you know, they can look at film and manifest a picture just by looking at it on the photographic paper, like let's say Polaroid paper. There are some researchers, and I'll try to send you the links because I can't think of it off the top of my head, the name of the guy that's done some work on it. And there's a movie called Letters from the Big Man that was produced by the guy that I'm thinking of. And I want to say his first name's Christopher, but that doesn't really help you.
Right. But I can look
But
that up.
Letters from the Big Man.
Okay.
Christopher Munch, maybe is his name.
Right. Letters from the Big Man.
And the reason that they haven't been able to catch one is because they are far superior to any human that's chasing them. They can disappear. You know, they're not, you know, ape men. And we just kind of have to get out of that mindset that just because they're big and furry, you know, kind of like Yeti probably also, that they're primitive, because they're not.
Right. Okay. And then so recently we have the government coming out and they're quote unquote admitting that the stuff that we're seeing in the skies and we've been seeing for many years, they've known about it, but they don't know what they are. What are your thoughts on the government coming out with that information?
Wouldn't trust anything.
And that's all. That's the only.
They're not our friends.
Right. That's all you had to say. That's all I wanted to know. Last but not least, what are you currently working on, and what are you working on in the future, Michelle? And thank you again for coming on. I appreciate it.
Sure, you're welcome. So, like I said, I just finished 1984 to 1986, Seeing History with New Eyes, and I'll have to see how far I can go with it. I started at 1945. I've gotten up to 1996, and I still have several segments to put out. It's really tedious work, and it's actually kind of depressing. So whether I go beyond 1996 or not, I'm not really sure, but I've got probably 3 or 4 more left of that. I've been looking into the National Statuary Hall at the U.S. Capitol building and finding a lot of hidden history in there. It kind of gives me clues on where to look and more information that fills in the blanks. And I see it as a who's who of the New World Order. And these are the statues that they hold up for whatever reason in our Capitol building. And there's a lot of this missing history in there with who's in there.
Right.
And I do like to follow up on places that people suggest, because I get a lot of information that way too. Places I wouldn't look otherwise. And I'm just really detailed oriented. So, you know, it's like the more I look, the more I find. And it's really a pleasure and a joy to be able to do this work. And I can't get it out fast enough because it seems like people are ready to have different information about what's actually been going on here and who's behind it and what's been going on.
Are you collaborating with anyone by any chance? to get this
Not
out?
really. I've done interviews with other people and things like that. But we all seem to overlap and find ways to come together and share information.
That's good.
So like, so we're not all coming from the same perspective, but just doing the work is important, and different things need to come out. So there's things other people are tuned into that I'm not, and I'm tuned into some things that other people aren't. But in the whole big picture, we kind of put all the pieces together and start sorting through it and make progress in finding out what's going on. And for me, the big thing is I just want to get the information out in a compelling way, in a way that's clear and understandable, so you're not trying to figure out what I just said.
Right. No, I
And
understand.
and a lot of people are ready for it. A number of people aren't, but it's just, you have to really be able to step back and let go of what we've been taught to start getting the new information in, because the truth is nothing like what we've been taught.
Right. I agree. And the reason why I asked you that is because in other paranormal topics, so to speak, or alternative topics, there's not a lot of collaboration. Like in the ufology field, there's not a lot of collaboration. It's very ego driven. Same thing with, cryptozoology, very ego driven. So I wanted to know if maybe you were facing some sort of like, hey, I have this information, but I don't want to tell you, Michelle, because you know what I'm saying. It seems like you have people that want to work with you to get these puzzle pieces together.
Right. I have had lots of communications with other people, and making forward progress with putting more of the pieces together. So
Awesome.
Interviews and so forth, roundtables.
So, I lied and I apologize. Because I need to know your perspective on this one last thing, and that is CERN. Like, what do you think of CERN? And then we'll call it a day.
It's not what they tell us.
Like, did it create the Mandela effect?
I think it could have. I absolutely think it could have. I absolutely think it could have been created as a portal to bring in demonic beings. And there is a mirror of CERN on Long Island at Brookhaven National Laboratories. It's a reverse of CERN.
Really?
So you have the same thing on the eastern end of Long Island that you do in Geneva, Switzerland. Same thing.
Wow. I don't know if you ever heard of
two. And there's other, what are they called? Particle accelerators or colliders, or
that's
whatever.
What I was going to say.
There's more than two, but CERN is the best known. Right. Brookhaven's not known, but it's like same configurations and everything.
Do they line up by any chance? I don't know did you ever try to see if
probably I've kind of looked at it, but it's I wasn't expecting that when I was looking there. Right. And there's other things in eastern Long Island that are interesting. That's where the Montauk Project was, all of that.
Yeah, that's where they got Stranger Things from.
Mm-hmm.
So, Michelle, thank you so much for your time. I mean, I really would like to keep you for another 2 hours, but because I know you got things to do, and I have another interview coming up in a couple of hours. But thank you for your time. I appreciate it. If you can do me a favor, send me any pertinent links that you want people to go to. I'll put it on the bottom of the description. And for the thumbnail for YouTube, if you can send me a picture that you're comfortable with, and I'll put that up. Because I mean, I'm on YouTube and I'm on BitChute, but YouTube has the most people, so unfortunately, I have no choice but to use YouTube.
Check in the first emails we did, because I think I sent you a thumbnail already.
Okay, I'll check.
Sure
I know I saw your bio, but I don't
think
know
there's a thumbnail. I think there's a thumbnail there. I'm pretty sure. If I didn't, let me know. But I think I did.
Again, thank you. I appreciate it. And keep doing your thing. And then I'm definitely going to have you on, Michelle, if you'd like to come back on. But just keep doing your work, great. Okay?
Yep, definitely keep me in mind.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.